Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for joining me this afternoon for planning for year 11. Hope you're having had a great morning so far, and again, I'm glad that you're with me. My name is Julie Darrington. I'm Vice President of Consulting for VantagePoint. If you're not familiar with VantagePoint, we are a broadband and engineering consulting firm that specializes in technical and financial and regulatory expertise. So I've been fortunate to spend my entire career in the industry and spent, prior to joining VantagePoint, spent 21 years with CenturyLink, now Lumen, and started when it was back in the old Century telephone days, so very rural markets, which was my focus. And most recently, prior to joining VantagePoint, was Vice President of Operations for a 5-state region. I'm just thankful to be back in the rural space, and again, glad to be with you here this morning. So I wanted just to touch base on our current landscape and really talk about why should you worry about year 11. There are many multiple 10-year revenue streams, but as rate of return carriers, you rely very highly on cost support, and without that funding, most business models are uneconomic. So this morning, again, let's look at year 11, when the 10-year revenue streams potentially end, and the uncertainties associated with year 11. We'll touch base on a few different things, some broadband trends, user demands, competitive landscape, and the revenue impacts as well. But you're looking at the 10-year revenue streams. Of course, there's multiple. The ACAM1, revised ACAM1, ACAM2, again, 60% of regulated ILECs accepted model support and are on those 10-year revenue streams. Alaska Plan, another example. Of course, the CAF2 funding, which was of carriers, the areas that they had first right of refusal on. And so, again, that auction was, at FCC would say, was very successful, and that was back in 2018, where you can see 121 companies accepted 1.47 million in support, that annual. So when we look at upcoming funding, RDOF, of course, starts the end of this month, that auction, an incredible opportunity for those that are taking part in it, obviously, with it being 15 times larger than the CAF2 funding. So as you know, RDOF is primarily those census blocks where the price cap carriers are currently receiving support from the CAF Phase 2 model support. And so what we anticipate, of course, is that the current administration, very much favors the auctions, and this could imply that the current support mechanisms that are in place today could certainly be set up for future auctions as the years move on. So if we look at year 11, what does that mean for your company? It'll depend on what, of course, your mechanisms are. So if we look at this slide, I know it's a busy one, but I just wanted to highlight a few things. We've got outlined here, we have ACAM1, revised ACAM1 and ACAM2, as well as Alaska Plan, et cetera. With rural broadband experience, those individuals receiving that funding, year 11, the funding ends in June of 2024. So year 11 obviously would impact right after that, where let's just use ACAM2 as an example. ACAM2, got $4.9 billion in funding over the 10 years, and that ends on December of 2028. And soon we'll be adding RDOF to this support mechanism tracking as well. So again, why worry about year 11? If you think through, here's just a example of a ACAM2 company. So we've got annual end user revenues of 3.5 million. You've got the annual ACAM support, which is nearly the 2.7 million. Obviously, other operating and miscellaneous revenues, so your gross revenue at 6.3 million. When you remove the operating expenses, between general expenses, et cetera, you have a $4.59 million expense line. So you end up with a projected net income of 1.7 million. And many are positioned with very positive net income with their annual support, whether it's ACAM or others. Others are much closer to being even in that number. So if you're in a position of having some extra dollars, of course you can look at, do I save it? Do I invest it? Do I utilize those dollars to diversify my revenues, to position myself for the future? So we look at the next slide. If those annual ACAM support dollars in this specific example will go away, of course, that 2.7 million, the numbers obviously look significantly different. So now what? In this example, of course, it assumes you're providing your continual quality service. You obviously, over the course of 11 years or 10 years, excuse me, you would look for increased revenue, likely see increased expenses as well. But in the end, really looking at what my projected net income could potentially look like. So we've worked with many clients to really strategize what to do and prepare now, so that in the future, depending on what happens with those revenue streams, we can be better positioned. So again, preparing today for tomorrow. So if those current net income allows today, do you save it? Do you invest? Do you look at expansion opportunities? Are there reasons or approaches in retiring of capital credits, etc.? So a lot of different things to think about as you're preparing for tomorrow. So let's just take a quick look here, a future glance at trends and user demands, the competitive landscape, etc. We all are living in the COVID world, and it's really accelerated our remote learning. It's accelerated utilizing telehealth. Of course, in our day-to-day efforts, we are utilizing Zoom and Microsoft Teams and Google Meet, and it's really just changed how we do business, how we communicate with each other. Really heavy usage when it comes to remote workforce, and so just even how we utilize it today, in our industry, but just how consumers use and live and work today has changed just drastically with the situation with the COVID that we're dealing with. As we look at broadband trends, obviously we're seeing significant increases even this year, but in this particular slide, we can see that per Nielsen Group, there was forecast that a power user would be at that 1 gig mark here in 2020. From an FCC average user standpoint, they're forecasting average user to be around 100 meg, which is relevant. That's exactly what we're seeing from a utilization standpoint. But even the FCC is forecasting that by 2028, that average user will need a gig of service. So those are just some broadband trends that we're seeing as we move forward in the years to come. When you think about the broadband usage, the expectations are continually increasing. Today, we're in that, the 2020 range of about 30 billion IoT or Internet of Things devices. But you can see that that's going to continually increase, and the billions of devices are forecasted in 2025 to be at 75 billion. So it's going to continually to dramatically increase, and whether that's in the home or in businesses, the devices that we use today will continue to see that expansion. So how do we take what we anticipate from a user demand standpoint and ensure that our networks can handle that traffic? And how much traffic can your network sustain? Obviously, we've seen significant COVID impacts with e-learning and the teleworking, e-health, virtual conferences like we're experiencing today, and the continual over-the-top streaming as people move from traditional video to YouTube TV and Netflix and other streaming. And then we do anticipate the continued increase with artificial intelligence, etc. We'll talk a little bit more here in a minute about network demands. But let's also talk about the future landscape of competition. We're seeing more and more discussions about GEOs and LEOs, wireless providers, cable companies offering 10 gig, a lot of electrical co-ops in the broadband space, and what are your neighboring LECs doing? So really understanding what your competitive threats are in your area, which then could also be, just as importantly, potential partnerships. So let's look at the competitive landscape here a little bit more. We've got obviously the GEO satellites, the Viasat, HughesNet. They claim to offer 100 meg, but users often complain about issues with achieving much less. There's weather impacts, data caps, etc. So that certainly has been challenging over time. From a cable standpoint, they continue to upgrade their networks. DOCSIS 4, of course, 10 gig platform. We do see some distance limitations in the very, very rural areas, but certainly highly competitive from a speed capability standpoint. Go over here to the right on the copper facility side. Of course, DSL has its limits. Old, tired RBOC networks have been underserving those rural networks for many, many years with speed and quality issues. But of course, fiber has incredible capabilities. Excuse me, with GPON now being focused in discussions about XGS-PON and 10 gig symmetrical in the future. In the news, we continue hearing more and more about the LEO satellites. Of course, Elon Musk is in the news continuously. Of course, the LEOs orbit the Earth much, much closer at, between 740 or 710 to, down to 340 miles in the air. So, it really significantly minimizes latency and offers increased capacity. We're seeing that there's a lot of conversation about what can SpaceX offer and the others listed here. In one of the events earlier this year, Elon Musk stated that, that he or, of course, the LEOs are not a threat to the telcos. Really focused more on bulk capacity, third world countries, wholesale opportunities, the very, very remote areas. And so the services being promoted are in that 50 to 100 meg standpoint, but really, I think that's to be determined. Time will tell with service availability probably in 2021. And then, of course, last but not least is our, the wireless competitors as 5G needs. There's more spectrum required and more access points, etc. So, 5G certainly is applicable in many areas, but not necessarily in our rural markets. So what happens in year 11 as support goes away? If we think about our user demands continue to increase, the competitive pressures are increasing, and what if the support and our support revenue decreases? What does that look like? And how do we best position today to be in a good place come year 11? So what do we anticipate with the FCC? Was there a possibility of an extension of the existing support? Of course, there's no guarantee of an extension. And if there is, what does that look like? Very likely, today we're looking at a 10.1 or a 25.3 speed requirement, depending on what mechanism you're a part of. What would that look like in the future? Could there be a 120 or a gig? What does that look like? The main thing you can be doing and preparing for today is to ensure you're maximizing your network so you don't have to reinvest tomorrow. As you're making investments today, the requirements could change, and best positioning yourselves for the future. Again, we believe that there's a high possibility that the FCC could do a reverse auction. They've had, again, prior success with CAF2. There's extremely high interest in RDOF that we're seeing as we speak. And so we anticipate that many will be competing for future funding support. the support that likely you're receiving today could be up for grabs and certainly highly competitive. From a future standpoint, when you think about operations and operationally your organization, and as we know, user demands are continuing to increase. They're that's putting pressure on networks. Competitors will continue to improve in the years to come. So what can you do operationally to prepare? With our COVID situation, of course, teleworking is becoming a new norm. We have virtual customer service, less face-to-face interaction with customers. So that certainly is something to take into consideration of how the new norm or what we're dealing with today can impact you long-term from an operational standpoint. Are there possibilities to downsize from a brick and mortar standpoint or a lease facility standpoint if you can allow some individuals to work remote? And working remote, we've seen extensive positives. A lot of staff can be extremely efficient and productive working remote, and others prefer to be in the office. So it's really taking a sort of a evaluation of, is there operational efficiencies that can be gained, which could be revenue and expense efficiencies as well. The network traffic will continue to evolve. So evaluating your network, evolving into, again, future XGS. What does that look like? What is your plan from an operational standpoint and from your network assets as well? And certainly last but not least is service offerings. Are there expanded product offerings that you should be pursuing? If you aren't offering a managed Wi-Fi solution, are you offering any kind of smart home install support, computer services support? Are there data center opportunities? A lot of things that can be reviewed from an operational standpoint as you look at the future years to come. So let's work backwards for a second and really think about planning today and how that can shape your tomorrow. Do you have a plan in place? Do you have a 5-year plan? Do you have a 10-year strategic plan? Is it something that you've worked through? Has your board, is your staff? And if not, really encouraging you to have those pieces in place. Let's talk about planning ahead from a network demand standpoint. Designing your network for your future needs. So you've got average bandwidth. Are you looking at it from a peak bandwidth standpoint? Cisco has their visual networking index prediction, and they're predicting that peak internet will grow 4.7 times through 2022. And this is resulting in a 36% compounded annual growth rate. VantagePoint has worked with a lot of obviously clients, and we're predicting actually and experiencing even higher compounded annual growth rates at 50% of traffic, and forecasting that over the next 5 years. And really that's taking into consideration, the 50% is taking into consideration expansion in new areas, new customer bases that are being added or forecasted as far as growth, and just general customer bandwidth needs and increases. So we really anticipate a stronger growth. But let's just look at a simple compounded table. So when building or upgrading your network, predicting bandwidth needs can be very challenging. And so if we're looking at this particular one, we can see and just look at, in that 30, 40, 50% rate. Let's just look at 30%. So as an example, if you're at a 30% compounded annual growth rate, today you have, let's just say you have 10 gig of internet uplink. With a 30% growth rate, you're looking at year 10 of being at 13 times what you are today. So in the case of a 10 gig uplink, that would be 130 gig uplink that would be required in the future. So really just using this simple compounded table can assist you in forecasting the needs that your network may have as you move forward in the future. Planning ahead from a competitive standpoint is also important. the definition of neighbor is changing. So when we say, and we look at who your competition is, we say, who's your neighbor? I mean, a neighbor is potentially an electrical co-op. It could be a cable provider. It could be a new provider in the area. And really understanding who is within 100 miles of you, and understanding who those individuals are. Do you have a relationship with them? Do you know what their long-term goal is, or what your potential long-term goal could be with a partnership or opportunities to work together? One thing that we're seeing is, in some cases, management succession, where there's shared resources in management succession. It could be a shared resources from an accounting standpoint if there's retirements taking place. So really just understanding who's around you. They may be our competitors today, but maybe they could be partners in the future. Planning ahead from a revenue standpoint, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, really understanding what percentage of revenue you will lose if that support goes away, and evaluating how you can make that up. You know, what's your number, and how will that loss impact your projected net income? Really backing into looking at ARPU. How many customers do you need to offset any kind of a revenue decline in the future? One of the opportunities we're also seeing is that in areas where there's an opportunity to look at what we call ghost customers. So customers that have never been with you today that you have service to. So again, where can you look for new customers to expand in the future to ensure that you can offset revenue declines if they indeed take place? Are there other researching new service offerings? Are there other areas you can focus? I'm sure that there's been a lot of work around cellular backhaul, and are there data center opportunities with enterprise customers? Again, I mentioned managed Wi-Fi today if you're not offering it today, and other things, ways to diversify and look for service with higher profit margins in the process. So back to the year 11 slide. Again, if that $2.69 million year support would go away, extremely impactive to the projected net income. What kind of things can you do today to offset those? Are there expansion opportunities? Are there areas to diversify? Are there operational efficiencies or decreased expense actions that you need to take today to offset those net income concerns in the future? Really stepping back and really looking at how will you offset potential revenue declines as you look forward in the months and years ahead. Take the opportunity to think outside the box. What kind of creative things can you do and potentially partnering with people around you? We're seeing a significant variety of partnerships, and the key is looking for people to partner with that have a shared vision or a shared mission, because those are going to be the most successful opportunities. Just one example to show or share with you from a neighboring electrical co-op standpoint. We're seeing several RECs who own their mainline fiber, they own the drops, and then they're leasing that back to the service provider. And then the RLEC is providing the electronics, they're providing the CPE, and they provide all the services to the customers. But again, that mainline fiber and the equipment, the drops are provided by the REC. And it's a great partnership to be able to provide the higher speed, the needed broadband in a greater area. But those REC partnerships have been very successful. And one of the positives is the cooperative mindset. The members are demanding quality service. And so this partnership has been certainly a really strong opportunity and something that is being considered. From a diversification standpoint, I encourage you to pull from strengths of your team members. Is there a need in your communities? And we've had just some creative, very amazing ideas come out of board retreats, strategic planning sessions that we've held with clients, where we've done a lot of out-of-the-box sort of brainstorming, everything from purchasing in nearby companies, partnering with nearby companies. Could it be a cable company, wireless, an IT company, oftentimes complementing services, but not always. So are there community expansions, edge out opportunities? The key here with the edge out is, are there grant and loan grants and other funding resource opportunities that could be beneficial to you as well? From a budget standpoint, mainly from an operational view, we highly encourage budgeting and forecasting. You need to develop it. You need to keep it refreshed. Highly recommending keeping it refreshed so you understand exactly where you're at from a month-to-month standpoint, obviously from an annual standpoint, in determining if you need to right-size your operational expenses. From a staffing standpoint, is there opportunity to automate with improvements in technology? In the staffing attrition comment, we're not encouraging to do headcount cuts, but certainly evaluating as you move into backfilling needs, as you have retirements, et cetera. On the ONTs, optical network terminals, is there an opportunity? We see that there's significantly reduced truck rolls that allows you to offer a better experience to your customer. Is there an opportunity to outsource other tasks if you have a shortage in your personal qualified talent? We're seeing, again, I mentioned earlier, accounting, some customer service, some shared management, seeing smaller companies sharing those resources and or contracting them. And again, allowing for increased efficiencies and certainly cutting of expenses that really are helping become more efficient in the future. So what now? We recommend 5 specific areas of focus, steps that you can take today. So the very first thing you need to do is a self-audit. What shape is your network in? What is your future staff looking like with retirements? Really step back and do a self-audit and understand exactly where you're at today and how that could impact you as you move forward into your year 11. The second piece, here we go. The second place is completing a revenue review, determining how much revenue is tied to support in your particular situation and determining how much you need to replace. Thirdly, operational efficiencies, reviewing your engineering, is there opportunity with your locates? If you don't outsource today, doing a cost comparison and seeing if that makes more sense. Marketing, accounting, again, sharing a resource from an accounting standpoint, staffing levels. One of the stats that I thought was very important to think through is from an operational expenditure standpoint. The Fiber Broadband Association did some research and did a survey, and they determined that 85% of OpEx is attributed to truck rolls and churn management of accounts. And so, significant dollars are associated from an OpEx standpoint that we really need to be looking at from an operational efficiency. Network planning and funding opportunities. Again, as you know, oftentimes expansions are not economic without grants, and those grants are required in order to make the feasibilities favorable. This morning, first thing in the kickoff, Christy Zabel from VantagePoint reviewed a funding opportunities presentation, and if you did not see that this morning, I highly encourage you to go back and watch it so you can see the vast amount of opportunities and resources that you have from a funding standpoint that can help you any expansion opportunities be more feasible and much more attractive. So please take an opportunity to see that. And lastly, and what you need to do now is really understand and meet your neighbors and know what their potential plans are. If you can build those relationships and partner with them, to be really strong as you move forward in the future. So with that, 30 minutes in, again, important to take the steps now, because if, depending on where you're at with your funding, year 11 in ACAM is 2026 and ACAM 2 is 2028, and the other sources. So we all know that time flies in this industry, so I highly encourage you to take advantage today and prepare for tomorrow. So at this point, I know that we're right at 30 minutes, but if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I would certainly appreciate any questions that you may have. So thank you for your time. I'm not seeing any chat questions, but again, anything that you would potentially need, just reach out to any of the staff at VantagePoint, and we will look forward to working with you. Have a great rest of your day.